The origins of the Germanic peoples is not a simple one. For a start, the Germanic tribes would not have called themselves Germanic. By the 1st century AD, the writings of Caesar Tacticus and other Roman-era writers indicate a division of Germanic-speaking peoples into tribal groupings based on the rivers of Oder and Vistula, what we now call Poland, and these were known as the East Germanic tribes. Scandinavia, minus the Danish islands, were known as the North Germanic tribes. Those around Jutland and the Danish islands, known as the Invigions. Those around the Elbe River, known as the Imanons. And finally those around the lower Rhine River, known as the Isturions. The sons of Manus, Isturions, Imrions and Isturions are collectively known as the West Germanic tribes. These different groups all developed their own separate dialects, the basis for the differences among the Germanic languages, even in the present day. They were viewed as barbarians to the Romans, and like the Celts, were ununified. However, they did share similar language, culture, and religious worship. Germania was originally inhabited by the Celts. The early Germanic tribes pushed the Celts west, who became the Gaul. The Celts who remained in Germania became slaves, were subjugated, or simply assimilated. Early Celtic culture had a huge influence on early Germanic culture, and they only started to be viewed as different in the 1st century AD. The ability to push into Celtic territory also shows the supremacy of the Germanic tribes' military abilities in comparison to the Celts. The hierarchy of the Germanic tribes placed the nobility on top, who consisted of family bloodlines. Next were the freemen, who consisted of warriors who could bear arms and also raise armies. The servants were on the bottom, who consisted of farmers, fishermen, blacksmiths, and the working class. These differed only slightly from slaves, who were not compensated for their work and instead were owned by either free men or nobility. Conversely, the Germanic tribes were more equal than most. Chiefs and nobility dined with their tribe, and most lived in only simple houses. This did change over time as kings grew more powerful, but early on the Germans lived highly egalitarian societies, as essentially everyone was equally poor. They chose their kings and leaders from noble birth, and this was very important to the Germanic peoples. But their commanders were chosen through valour and experience, and the power of the king was not absolute or arbitrary. These free men ruled less through authority and more through setting a good example, and the more admiration they inspired, the more men they'd rally around them. There is also a third pillar of leadership, the priests, who were the only ones permitted to act as judges for offenders, with chastisement not being done from the military or the crown, but by the gods. Even the nobility were judged by the priests. If you had a problem with the king, you would most likely just be able to walk up and tell him to his face. Kings, although respected, were not legislated or shrouded in pompery. This seals how meritocratic the Germanic society was, and most likely why they grew to such success. Men were dominant in their households, and the reputation of everybody in the family lay on the shoulders of men. All of the men in the family were also expected to pull their weight in either hard labour or a skill, such as boat making, but this was rare. Most men were warriors, and it was considered unmanly to do other work other than fighting. Other work, even important stuff such as tilling the fields, was done by women, old, weak, dumb, blind, disabled, or the slaves. Being a leader and warrior was seen as the same thing to the Germans, with physical prowess being a necessity for being viewed as a real man. Germans instead preferred to take what they wanted through force, and when not raiding or at war, the German warriors were quite lazy, thinking of nothing more than eating and sleeping. This grew into a love for fighting and a hatred for peace. German men were also known to be stoic. Tacticus wrote that a woman may discreetly express her grief, while a man must nurse his own heart. This was unusual for the time. For example, the Latins and Greeks would openly weep, and it was not seen as unmanly. Women were viewed with much respect, but were far from equal. They would have had a huge amount of influence over their husbands and sons, and were also in charge of running family matters. Because of this, some women may be quite powerful, but only in the background. Marriage was something taken very seriously by most Germanic tribes, being monogamous. However, in rare cases, male nobles would take multiple women in order to secure alliances and or have children. Marriage was viewed as an equal alliance between males and females, sharing fortunes of both war and peace. Wives were also highly respected in society, especially in front of her children, and couples were expected to have children. They had a high regard for chastity, and saw having sex before the age of 20 as disrespectful. Adultery was also taken very seriously by the Germans. The husband was able to punish his wife as he saw fit, but the most common punishments were cutting her hair off, stripping her off in front of her relations, expelling her from the house, and pursuing her with a whip throughout the village. An adulterous wife would also have been known as a prostitute. It is unknown what the punishment for male adultery was, but it was likely severe. Giving into lust or vice was seen negatively by the Germans, quite the opposite of what was going on in Rome and Greece at the time. The Germanics were also not as interested in art as others of the time, and the Romans stated they cared little for agriculture, and instead maintained a diet on milk, cheese and meat. In fact, some Roman historians called the Germanic tribes quite lazy. However, the Germanic tribes did enjoy telling oral stories and passing them on through the generations. These stories would form the basis of their religion, history and legends. The Germanic tribes were also quite democratic. Most tribes would elect their own king, who was chosen from a warrior assembly and could be deposed through election. Kings were expected to lead their people into battle and raids, as well as keeping order and safety in their lands. They also led a more symbolic role to unify the tribe around them, similar to how monarchies still work in the modern day. Be sure to check out my other channel, History Sticks, for the complete, longer and comprehensive video.